All right, this is Saul Rodriguez from WARR Media. We are joined by Peabody, Emmy, and Academy Award nominee Sam Pollard. He, of course, is the director of The League that is out in theaters on July 7th and digitally on July 14th. So, Sam, really appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us today. The question I want to start off with is, of course, the Major League Baseball has announced that they're having a game in Birmingham, Alabama between the Giants and the Cardinals to honor Hank Aaron, the Negro Leagues. What do you think about that?
I think it's fantastic, Saul. I think to have a game at Rickwood Stadium in Birmingham, Alabama, where the Birmingham Black Barons used to play, where Willie Mays came out of, I think it's fantastic. I think what it'll do for the Negro Leagues and the history of Negro Leagues will give it more exposure, and make more people in America aware that there were these phenomenal Negro League teams and players in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So I think it's great. I was in Kansas City on Wednesday night, and I was at a screening with Bob Kendrick, who runs the Negro League Museum. And it's one of the things we told the audience at the end of the screening about the game at Rickwood Stadium. That's great. And some of the stuff that I shot, some of the recreations in the film, I shot in Rickwood Stadium. So it was fun. I got to find out when the game is. I may have to fly to Birmingham to see that game.
Sam, there's a constant conversation that there isn't enough Black players in Major League Baseball right now. What kind of impact can a film like The League have on the type of dialogue in today's world, or what type of impact do you hope it has?
Well, the game has changed. I mean, the attraction for young African Americans, in urban communities is not so much baseball anymore. It's been basketball. I mean, you go and see the courts. You don't see baseball, you see basketball courts. So I'm not sure that this film will engage young Black people who want to go play baseball. It may engage them to learn the history, and maybe the thing to remember is that Little League games mostly are played in the suburban communities, and I don't know many young Black kids anymore who play baseball as much as they did back when I was growing up. But hopefully it'll just make people more interested in understanding the game. I mean, we got great Latino players in the game now because they grow up in communities in PR, Dominican Republic, and Venezuela, where they play baseball all the time. In Japan, they play baseball all the time. And maybe it'll get people excited. I mean, you hope that there'll be someone who says, let's start a Little League roster in our community. And maybe that's the hope. We'll see.
Yeah, I hope so. Also, one of my favorite part of the films is when you guys talked about the All-Star games and all that, like with Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson. Those guys would go at it. They're almost like real life Marvel characters, honestly, like the way they're talked about and described. If you could see one Negro League hitter take on a pitcher now, like say Shohei Ohtani, like who would you choose? Who would you go with?
Josh Gibson.
Oh yeah,
it'd be Josh Gibson. It'd be great to see a contemporary player against a Josh Gibson, or see Satchel Paige against a contemporary Major League Baseball hitter, so that would be fascinating to me, But you never know. I mean, the world has changed so much. It's like the discussion when I was doing the Bill Russell documentary, who's the greatest player of all time? Now, I would say that's a generational answer. For my generation, it was Bill Russell. For those who grew up in the 90s, it was Michael Jordan. For those who grew up in the 2000 aughts, it's LeBron, so it always changes, man. But it'd be like, remember when they used to say, what would happen if Ali boxed? Who did they say they would compare them to? If he boxed, what contemporary boxer? Who would win? George Foreman. I mean, he did box George Foreman. I don't remember, but it's always that discussion.
I'm glad to be on, and definitely glad to be on with you, Sam. I'm a Spike Lee completist, so I'm very.
What does that mean, man? You're a Spike Lee completist.
I mean, I gotta watch all his movies, and I know his history, so I'm very glad, knowing his history and the work that you've done with him. I'm knowing your name. I mean, you stand alone on your own. I'm not trying to downplay your own work, but
it's all right, man. It's all right. It's all right, man. It's all right to connect with Spike, man. It's all right.
I'm sure I could talk to you about him for hours. I could talk to you about working on Star Wars probably for a couple
Oh
hours, man.
yeah, man. Yeah,
But yeah,
Star Wars.
but let me stop derailing though. As far as the league goes, it's a wonderful piece of work, and I think anyone who is interested at all in Black history, let alone Black history in sports, is should really connect with this movie. Just I want to get your overall get your thoughts on picking up this subject matter, and what was your motivations behind doing so. You've done a lot of work recently in the realm of sports and sports history, sort of profiling other athletes of import like Arthur Ashe and Bill Russell. What was it about connecting to the Negro Leagues and putting your eye on that made you feel that it was necessary at this point in time?
Well, over 10 years ago, one of the producers of the film, Byron Motley, he reached out to me because his dad, Bob Motley, had been an umpire in the Negro Leagues in the 40s and 50s, and he had written a book with his son. And they wanted to do a film about Bob's experiences. And Byron had also done a bunch of interviews with former Negro League players. So we sort of said, okay, let's do a story about not only your dad, but the evolution and the final demise of the Negro Leagues when Jackie Robinson entered Major League Baseball. So we started that journey a long time ago, and like lots of documentaries, it took a moment, man, to raise the money. And finally, we were able to raise the money. We brought Questlove on as an EP, whose family was into baseball, Negro League baseball. And we were able to find a company named Radical Media that was able to find us some money to make this film. So we really got into it. And for me, guys, I grew up in the 60s, so I was a big baseball fan in 1964 with the St. Louis Cardinals, which had Lou Brock and Lou Brock and Kurt Flood and Bob Gibson and Bill White on their teams. And my dad was a big St. Louis Cardinals fan, so I became a fan. So, and back in the 60s, American baseball was Americans' national pastime. So that was why I was so attracted to it. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, the reason that I'm doing these films about the Negro League and Bill Russell and Arthur Ashe is because it's all a part of that African-American experience, and if you guys know my work, individually and with Spike, we're all about telling the stories of our people, and this was another opportunity in this particular realm to tell the stories of our people, and people, this, we live in a country now where there's this big sort of like denial that Black people had anything to do with the development of this country. But if you look at our sports world, when Black people came into baseball, when Black people came into football, when Black people came into basketball, what happened to the game? Those games changed, man. Those games got exciting, they got interesting. When there's a section in the Bill Russell film where Nelson George says, when Elgin Baylor, Will Chamberlain, Bill Russell came into NBA, they brought the Black athletic, perspective to the game, and you see how the game changed. That's what we bring. I mean, and we not only bring it, this, guys. We not only bring it in sports, we bring it in the music, we bring it in the clothing and the culture, we bring it in the language. We bring it in the gestures. So you go and you see white people, when they open their mouths, sometimes these young people, they sound like us. When they're saying certain gestures, they sound like us. I mean, it's amazing. And then you got people saying, there's no such thing as systemic racism in America. Guys, are you crazy? This is 2023, and the challenge that we face as people in media is to keep introducing our people and white people to the fact that this history is a part of American history. The country of America, the history of development of America is based on enslaved Black people of color and annihilation of Native people. You remember that phrase, "Go west, young man." But the other part of that phrase is "Go west and annihilate the Indians, the Native people, so we can have take their land."
it's so much that's involved with this particular history, Sam. And when you look at the Negro Leagues and their development in the early half of the 20th century, it just like that story alone tells so much about the fight, for integration, and also what segregation wrought within our society. And it was more complicated actually than, and your movie does such a good job of outlining this. It was more complicated than the fact that, well, Black people were treated separately and we were excluded from white society in a lot of ways, and we had to fight to get rights back and get access and all that. It was definitely a lot of that, but we also created our own things that were of value, and that we really appreciated in that time that they existed. When you look at the way that the Negro League represented neighborhoods and populaces that were overlooked, in teams like the Pittsburgh and the
Crawfords. Yeah.
Pittsburgh Crawfords, and I'm thinking of the other team in Pittsburgh,
Homestead Grays.
Homestead Grays. Yeah, thank you. And Kansas City and Chicago, the teams here in Chicago, and like these were the stars of their times, and they brought the people out for their all-star games and the Negro League World Series, and they were really sources of pride and legends that transcended their times, and they still live with us today, like Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige, of course, and so many others. But what, in your mind, what is the most important element of the history of the Negro Leagues, and what do you think it says about Black determination in this country, and the pluses and minuses of integration versus segregation?
Well, it says a couple of things. It says that American history is very complicated, and I grew up at a time where I was told as a young man in 1964, 1965, Sam, don't think about being a Negro. That's the term right back then. Think about becoming a part of the American melting pot. Forget about where you came from. Become a part of the American melting pot, because if you do, you'll be a better American. Now, guys, I bought into that as a young man. Although, I said, when I first got into the film business, I said, when they would say, well, do you look at yourself as a Black editor? I said, no. Don't call me a Black editor. I'm just an editor. I don't want to be connected with just doing things for Black people. I don't want to make films about Black people. But then I met a filmmaker named St. Clair Bourne, wonderful documentary filmmaker, who basically, I was editing the film for him about Chicago blues musicians, Billy Branch, a harmonica player in Muddy Waters. I was doing a doc about blues musicians from Chicago. And he would say to me every day, Sam, listen, man, if you're going to be an editor, that's great, but your job, you got a responsibility to tell our stories. Because if you don't tell our stories, who will? And that was the same thing that Bill Greaves was saying to Stanley Nelson. That was the same thing that somebody was saying to Louis Messiah, was saying to all of us Black filmmakers of color. We got to tell our stories. So I took on that responsibility when I was one of the directors on Eyes on the Prize, and I tried to continue that, and then when I worked with Spike, he has the same philosophy, tell our stories. But the thing to remember about telling our stories is that our stories are complicated, because I learned back then that Jackie Robinson integrated Major Leagues, and it was wonderful. Now, I didn't know back then when I was 14, 15, that what did it do to the Negro League teams? What did it do to those teams in those communities? What happened to those communities when integration happened? So everything in America, guys, is a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword. I grew up in a community where, in New York City, where I learned about not only R&B, but jazz, about Latin music. But then when I left that community, I said, well, I want to go downtown. I want to integrate into the community. And I forgot about my community until I started to realize, oh no, you got to remember where you come from. You got to remember the peoples who you are standing on the shoulders of. You got to remember Fannie Lou Hamer. You got to remember Booker T. Washington. You got to remember Du Bois. You got to remember Malcolm. You got to remember all these people that you're standing on the shoulders of. You know, that's why it's so important for us to know our history. Because if you don't, it's like, and you know this, Kyle. Remember in Clockers when Delroy is beating up Mackay in the park, and he says something about, you don't know who, no, it's not Delroy, Keith David is beating up.
Keith David, yeah, right. Yeah. The cop,
and he says, you don't know your history. You don't know who Rosa Parks is. And Mackay's character says, Rosa Parks? Who's Rosa Parks? That's the thing. That's the challenge we face, to have our people remember where we come from. Look, who's looking over my left shoulder here? Is John Coltrane. You know,
yes, sir.
Now, if you ask a lot of young people like who John Coltrane is, John who?
Yeah.
That's why I'm here, man, to tell these stories.
And we're so glad and so appreciative that you are. And you know, this is another one that is definitely a great record of history and an entertaining you know, couple of hours to spend as well. So we definitely recommend our audience watch the league. Is going to be out on all digital platforms on July 14th, right?
That's
as
right.
well as
theatrically July 7th and all the digital platforms July 14th.
Yes, indeed. Look up if you can look at it at the theaters too. Go and try to do that. I know here in Chicago there will be some screenings at River East and Ford City and Crestwood, among other theaters. So for our people in Chicago, definitely look out for screenings of the league. Definitely appreciate you spending your time, Sam. We know you're doing a lot of press for the movie, and you know we don't want to take up like I said, I could take up a lot of your time, but I know we're not able to. But
it's all right. I got another doc coming out about in the end of this year about Charles Blow's book. You know the book, The Devil You Know?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, we shot a whole segment in Chicago. You know,
okay.
Yeah, about the fact that Black people of color moving out of Chicago, heading back south. You know?
I can speak to that but I would love to speak to you for that movie, because I can speak to that directly, and I will be able to do so even more at that time. But that's cool. Another story. But right. Sam, thank you so much, sir. Good luck with the release of this film and with your future projects.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. You too. Take it easy.